TIFU by letting my atheist dad defend me at my Catholic wedding. TIFU by letting my atheist dad defend me at my Catholic wedding. The moment I heard my future mother-in-law's voice rise above the gentle organ prelude, I knew my perfect Catholic wedding was about to become a nightmare. I just think it's interesting how she insisted on those non-traditional vows. Patricia's voice carried across the front pews like nails on a chalkboard. Makes you wonder about her commitment to the sacrament, doesn't it? I was standing in the vestibule, peeking through the crack in the heavy wooden doors, when I heard her continue, and that dress, showing her shoulders in God's house. I raised Michael better than to settle for someone so modern. My hand started shaking as I gripped my bouquet. 20 minutes before I was supposed to walk down the aisle, and my future mother-in-law was already assassinating my character in front of 200 guests. I could see heads turning, whispers spreading through the pews like wildfire. "Mom, please," I heard Michael's voice, barely above a whisper. My heart leaped. Finally, he was going to shut this down. "She's just nervous about the ceremony. Can't you just ignore it for now? We'll talk later." The bouquet nearly slipped from my hands. Ignore it? His mother was telling our entire families and friend groups that I wasn't good enough for her precious son, and he wanted me to ignore it? Nervous? Patricia's laugh was sharp enough to cut glass. "I'm trying to save my son from making the biggest mistake of his life. This girl clearly doesn't understand what it means to be a proper Catholic wife." That's when I saw my dad's shoulders go rigid in the front pew. Robert Chen had been the picture of restraint for the past year of wedding planning. When Patricia made passive-aggressive comments about my heathen father at the engagement party, he smiled politely. When she suggested I needed more spiritual guidance to be worthy of her son, he bit his tongue. When she questioned whether someone raised by an atheist could truly understand Catholic values, he just squeezed my hand under the table. But watching his daughter get eviscerated in a church on her wedding day? Apparently, that was his breaking point. I watched him stand up slowly, his movements deliberate and controlled in that terrifying way that meant Dad was about to unleash hell. The same way he'd moved before dismantling corrupt board members and hostile takeovers. Patricia was still going, oblivious to the storm she'd just summoned. And don't even get me started on how she insisted on including her father in the ceremony. Having a non-believer escort her to the altar is practically sacrilegious. "Excuse me, Patricia." Dad's voice cut through her rambling like a sword. The entire church fell silent. Even the organist stopped playing. I pressed my face closer to the crack in the door, my heart hammering against my ribs. In 34 years of marriage to my devoutly Catholic mother, Dad had never once challenged anyone's faith publicly. He'd kept his atheism quiet, respectful, diplomatic. But the look on his face as he turned to face Patricia? That wasn't diplomatic Dad. That was the man who'd built a Fortune 500 company from nothing and crushed anyone who underestimated him. "I think," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the sanctuary, "we need to have a little chat about what the Bible actually says about judgment, don't you?" Patricia's face went pale. The church was so quiet I could hear my own panicked breathing. Oh God. This was about to get biblical. My mother's hand flew to her cross necklace as she whipped around to stare at my father. I could practically see her mental calculations, 34 years of marriage, and she'd never seen Robert go full nuclear in a house of God. Her eyes were screaming, "What the hell are you doing?" but Dad wasn't looking at her. His laser focus was entirely on Patricia. "Robert," Patricia stammered, clearly trying to regain her footing, "I don't think this is the time or place." "Oh, but it absolutely is," Dad interrupted smoothly, and I watched him pull his phone from his jacket pocket. "Because you see, Patricia, I've spent the last 18 months listening to you question my daughter's faith, her worthiness, her understanding of Catholic values. And since we're in God's house, I thought we should consult the actual source material." The phone thing was peak Dad, he'd clearly come prepared for war. I realized with growing horror that this wasn't a spontaneous explosion. This was a calculated execution, and he'd been planning it. Matthew 7 verses 1 to 3, he announced, his voice projecting like he was addressing a boardroom. "Judge not, that you be not judged. For with the judgment you pronounce you will be judged, and with the measure you use it will be measured to you. Why do you see the speck that is in your brother's eye, but do not notice the log that is in your own eye?" A collective intake of breath rippled through the congregation. Patricia's mouth opened and closed like a fish. "Dad, what are you doing?" I heard Michael hiss, finally finding his voice now that his mother was under attack. "Where was that energy 30 seconds ago when I needed defending?" "I'm educating your mother on scripture, son," Dad replied without missing a beat. "Since she seems to have forgotten some key passages. Patricia, would you like me to continue? Because I have so many more." My Aunt Margaret was frantically crossing herself in the third row. My cousin Jenny had her phone out. God, this was going to be all over family social media within minutes. I could see Uncle Paul looking like he wanted to crawl under the pew, and several of Michael's groomsmen were exchanging wide-eyed glances. "Now see here," Patricia finally found her voice, her face flushing red. "I have been a faithful member of this parish for 15 years. And yet," Dad continued conversationally, "you seem to have missed the part about loving your neighbor as yourself. Mark 12 verse 31. Or perhaps we should discuss Ephesians 4 verse 29? Let no corrupting talk come out of your mouths, but only such as is good for building up, as fits the occasion, that it may give grace to those who hear." The wedding coordinator, Mrs. Rodriguez, appeared at my elbow looking panicked. "Honey, we need to delay the processional," she whispered urgently. "This needs to be resolved before." "There's nothing to resolve," I heard Patricia snap, her voice getting shriller. "I'm simply looking out for my son's spiritual welfare. By publicly humiliating his bride in front of their entire community?" Dad's voice carried a dangerous edge now. "Tell me, Patricia, which Bible verse covers that particular brand of Christian charity?" Father Martinez, who had been frozen at the altar like a deer in headlights, finally started moving toward the front pews, his face pale. Michael looked like he was going to be sick. My mother had progressed from clutching her necklace to what appeared to be silent prayer. And my dad? My atheist, never sets foot in church except for weddings and funerals dad was just getting started. "Because I have some thoughts on Proverbs 31, he continued, his smile sharp as a blade. "You know, the part about virtuous women? I think you might find it illuminating." I watched in horrified fascination as my father, my diplomatic, keep the peace at all costs father, prepared to weaponize the entire book of Proverbs against my future mother-in-law. But before he could launch into his next biblical assault, Father Martinez finally reached our section of pews, his face flushed and his hands raised in a gesture that screamed, "Please God, make this stop." "Perhaps we could take this discussion to the sacristy," he said, his voice strained but trying to maintain that pastoral calm they probably taught in seminary. "The ceremony should begin." "Oh no, Father," Dad said, turning that corporate smile on our poor priest. "Patricia wanted to have this conversation in front of the entire congregation. I'm simply honoring her wishes." The way he said honoring made it sound like a threat. Several people in the back pews were starting to crane their necks to get a better view. I spotted my college roommate Sarah holding up her phone. Fantastic, this was going to be on Instagram stories before I even made it down the aisle. "Robert, please," my mother finally found her voice, grabbing Dad's arm. "This is Emma's wedding day." "Exactly," Dad replied, shrugging her off gently but firmly. "Which is why I find it so interesting that Patricia chose today to share her theological concerns about our daughter's character." Patricia looked like she was about to spontaneously combust. "I was having a private conversation in the front pew of a church," Dad cut her off. "During the prelude to your son's wedding. With your voice carrying to the balcony." "Patricia, I'm an atheist, not deaf." That got a few nervous chuckles from the congregation, which only seemed to make Patricia angrier. Michael finally stood up, looking like he'd rather be literally anywhere else on the planet. "Mr. Chen, maybe we should," he started. "Michael," Dad's voice went ice cold. "I watched you sit there for 5 minutes while your mother told 200 people that my daughter isn't worthy to be your wife. So no, we shouldn't do anything. You should have done something." The silence that followed was deafening. I could see Michael's face cycle through about 6 different emotions before landing on what looked like shame mixed with panic. Good. Maybe now he understood what I'd been dealing with for the past year. Mrs. Rodriguez tugged my arm again. "Emma, honey, your bridesmaids are getting antsy. Jessica's asking if she should come find you, and your maid of honor looks like she's about to march down there herself." I glanced back at my bridal party clustered by the church entrance. My sister Kate was indeed looking murderous, probably having heard every word through the thin walls. She'd been team elope from day one, and right now her "I told you so" expression was practically glowing. "Just give him 2 more minutes," I whispered back, unable to look away from the disaster unfolding in the sanctuary. Because despite the horror, despite knowing this would be family legend for decades to come, despite the fact that my wedding was turning into a theological cage match, there was a part of me that was secretly thrilled. For 18 months, I'd been swallowing Patricia's passive-aggressive comments about my faith, my worthiness, my family. For 18 months, I'd been the diplomat, the peacekeeper, the good Catholic girl who turned the other cheek. But my atheist father had apparently reached his limit of cheek-turning. "Now then," Dad continued, pulling up something else on his phone, "shall we discuss what Proverbs actually says about gossip? Because I think verse 26:20 might be particularly relevant here." Patricia's face went from red to white so fast I worried she might faint. "A gossip betrays a confidence, but a trustworthy person keeps a secret," Dad recited, his voice carrying that particular tone he used during hostile takeovers at work. "And since we're on the subject of Proverbs, let's not forget 16:28, a perverse person stirs up conflict, and a gossip separates close friends." Patricia's mouth was working soundlessly, but before she could form words, the church doors at the back suddenly burst open with a bang that echoed through the sanctuary. Every head turned to see my sister Kate striding down the center aisle in her burgundy bridesmaid dress, her face set in what our family had dubbed hurricane mode since childhood. "Excuse me," she announced loudly, her heels clicking on the marble floor like gunshots. "But the bride would like to know if we're having a wedding today or a theological debate tournament." Oh God. Now both my sister and my father were involved. This was escalating from disaster to apocalypse-level catastrophe. "Catherine, go back to the vestibule," my mother hissed, half standing in her pew. "This doesn't concern you." "Actually, Mom, when my sister's getting character assassinated by her future mother-in-law 20 minutes before her wedding, it absolutely concerns me." Kate stopped directly beside Patricia's pew, her arms crossed. "Patricia, right? We haven't officially met, but I feel like I already know you so well from all the stories." Michael looked like he was about to have a panic attack. "Kate, please, everyone just needs to calm down." "Oh, now you want people to calm down?" Kate whirled on him. "Interesting timing, Michael. Where was that energy when your mother was explaining to Father Martinez that Emma wasn't spiritually mature enough for Catholic marriage?" "Wait. What? When had Patricia said that?" That wasn't part of what I'd overheard. The blood drained from my face as I realized there had been an entire conversation before the part where I'd started listening. "She said what?" My voice came out louder than intended, carrying clear across the sanctuary. Mrs. Rodriguez grabbed my arm. "Emma, no, stay here, let them." But I was already moving, my heels clicking on the marble as I marched toward the front of the church, my dress train trailing behind me like a war banner. The congregation collectively held its breath as their bride appeared in the sanctuary before the processional, looking like she was ready to commit murder. "Patricia," I said, my voice deadly calm as I stopped in front of her pew. "Did you or did you not just tell our priest that I'm not spiritually mature enough for Catholic marriage?" Father Martinez went even paler, if that was possible. "Emma, perhaps we should discuss this privately." "No." I turned to face him, noting with satisfaction that my father looked proud and my sister looked ready to throw hands. "Father, I'd like to hear exactly what my future mother-in-law told you about my spiritual readiness. Right now. In front of everyone." "Emma," Michael's voice cracked. "Please, let's just start the ceremony." "Start the ceremony?" I stared at him in disbelief. "Michael, your mother just questioned my worthiness to marry you to our priest. She tried to sabotage our wedding behind my back, and you want to just proceed?" The silence stretched so long I could hear someone's stomach growling 3 pews back. Patricia finally found her voice, but it came out as a strangled whisper. "I was simply expressing concerns about the woman your son chose to spend his life with," Dad interjected smoothly. "To the priest performing the ceremony. 30 minutes before the wedding began." Kate nodded grimly. "Which, by the way, would be slander in any other context. Lucky for you we're in church, where apparently bearing false witness gets a pass if you do it with enough righteous indignation." Father Martinez was frantically making some kind of hand gesture at someone in the back of the church. Probably signaling the organist to start playing something, anything, to drown out the sound of a Catholic wedding imploding in real time. Ladies and gentlemen, I announced, turning to face the congregation with my biggest, brightest smile. I think we need to have a family meeting. The collective intake of breath from 200 wedding guests was audible. I could see Aunt Margaret clutching her pearls so hard I worried she might actually break the strand, and my cousin Tony had his phone out, definitely recording. This was going to be viral in the Chin family group chat within minutes. Emma, sweetheart, my mother's voice had that particular strained quality she used when trying to prevent me from doing something spectacularly stupid. Perhaps we should. Mom, no. I held up my hand, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. Patricia, stand up please. I beg your pardon? Patricia's voice came out as a squeak. Stand up. I repeated, channeling every ounce of authority I'd learned from watching my father run board meetings. You wanted to discuss my spiritual maturity publicly, so let's discuss it. Michael grabbed my arm. Emma, you're being unreasonable. I turned to look at him, really look at him, and something cold settled in my chest. This man, the man I was supposed to promise my life to in approximately 20 minutes, thought I was being unreasonable for defending myself against his mother's sabotage attempt. Michael, let go of my arm. My voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried to the back pews. Right now. He dropped his hand like I'd burned him. Good. Maybe he was finally starting to understand the gravity of this situation. Patricia reluctantly stood, her face cycling through emotions like a broken traffic light. Emma, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Oh, there's definitely been a misunderstanding, Kate interjected, moving to stand beside me. The misunderstanding is that you thought you could trash my sister behind her back without consequences. Dad cleared his throat and pulled his phone back out. Patricia, since you seem to enjoy biblical references, perhaps we should discuss what Matthew 7 verse 1 says about judgment? Judge not, that ye be not judged. Robert, please, Patricia's voice was getting higher. This is hardly the time. Actually, Patricia, this is exactly the time, I cut her off. Because apparently you thought 20 minutes before my wedding was the perfect time to convince Father Martinez that I'm unworthy of the sacrament of marriage. A murmur rippled through the congregation. I caught sight of Michael's college friends in the third row, looking like they were watching the most entertaining reality show of their lives. Great. This was going to follow us for years. Father Martinez stepped forward, his hands raised in what I assumed was supposed to be a calming gesture. Perhaps we could discuss this in the vestry. Father Martinez, I turned to him with my sweetest smile. I think the congregation would like to hear exactly what concerns Patricia shared with you about my spiritual fitness. After all, if I'm truly unworthy of Catholic marriage, shouldn't everyone here know before they witness invalid sacraments? The poor priest looked like he wanted the earth to swallow him whole. Mrs. Patterson did express some concerns about certain aspects of your faith journey. Such as? Dad's voice cut through the sanctuary like a blade. Patricia finally found her backbone. If you must know, I expressed concern about Emma's commitment to raising children in the faith, given her family's secular influences. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the air conditioning kick on in the church basement. My mother's gasp was audible from 3 pews away. My secular influences, I repeated slowly, feeling something hot and dangerous building in my chest. You mean my father? The man who paid for this wedding? The man who's walking me down the aisle despite not believing in any of this because he loves me? Emma, Michael started. No, Michael. I'm talking. I turned back to Patricia, who was beginning to look genuinely alarmed. Tell me, Patricia, exactly what makes you think you know more about my faith than I do? Patricia's chin lifted with that particular brand of religious superiority I'd seen 1,000 times before. Well, if you must know, I've been observing your family for months now. Your father's obvious discomfort during grace, the way he checks his phone during mass, how he couldn't even properly genuflect when we visited last month. You've been observing my family? The words came out sharp enough to cut glass. And then there's your own inconsistent attendance at weekday mass, your failure to properly observe Lent last year when I saw you eating meat on that Friday at Romano's. You were spying on us? Kate's voice went up an octave. I was being appropriately concerned about the spiritual foundation of this marriage, Patricia shot back, gaining confidence now that she had an audience. Michael deserves a wife who will prioritize their children's souls, not someone influenced by a household where faith is clearly treated as optional. Dad's laugh was low and dangerous. Optional. That's rich, Patricia. Tell me, which of your spiritual priorities led you to gossip about my daughter to the priest? I'm having trouble finding that commandment. It's not gossip if it's legitimate concern. Actually, it is, Father Martinez interjected weakly. Mrs. Patterson, what we discussed was meant to be confidential guidance, not. Wait. I held up my hand, pieces clicking together in my mind. Father, exactly how long have you two been having these conversations about me? The priest's face went through several colors before settling on green. Answer her, Michael said quietly, and for a moment I thought maybe he was finally going to stand up for me. Father, please answer her. Father Martinez cleared his throat. Mrs. Patterson has expressed concerns on several occasions during the past few months. Several occasions, I repeated. And you didn't think to mention this to me during our marriage preparation meetings? I felt it was more appropriate to address the concerns through pastoral observation. Pastoral observation? Dad's voice could have frozen hell over. You mean you've been watching my daughter like she's some kind of spiritual flight risk based on gossip from her future mother-in-law? The congregation was no longer pretending to mind their own business. I could see phones being discreetly lifted, and Mrs. Chen from my mother's book club was leaning so far forward she was practically in the aisle. It wasn't gossip, Patricia insisted, her voice getting shrill. Michael, tell them. You know I'm right. You've expressed concerns yourself about your father-in-law's influence. The words hit like a physical blow. I turned to stare at Michael, whose face had gone completely white. Michael? My voice came out as a whisper. You've been discussing my family with your mother? Behind my back? Emma, it wasn't like that. What was it like then? Kate demanded, moving closer to me in a protective gesture that would have been sweet if I wasn't currently dying inside. Because it sounds like you and your mother have been having a grand time psychoanalyzing my sister's worthiness for months. That's not. Michael ran his hands through his hair, destroying what had been perfect wedding styling. Mom, you promised you wouldn't bring this up today. You promised? I stared at him in disbelief. You knew she was going to ambush me and you just asked her to wait until after the ceremony? Emma, please, you're misunderstanding. Then explain it to me, Michael. Right now. In front of everyone. Explain exactly what you and your mother have been saying about my family behind my back. The silence stretched like a taut wire, ready to snap. Michael's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. The seconds ticked by with excruciating slowness while I waited for him to either save our relationship or destroy it completely. He started, then stopped, looking desperately at his mother. Oh, for heaven's sake, Patricia snapped, apparently deciding that subtlety was no longer an option. Fine. Yes, we've discussed concerns about your family's commitment to the faith. Michael was worried about how your father's atheism might influence your children's spiritual development. Worried enough to go behind my back instead of talking to me directly, I said, my voice deadly calm. Worried enough to let his mother spy on my family and report back like some kind of religious private investigator. That's not how it was. Michael finally found his voice. Mom she noticed things, and when she mentioned them, I thought maybe. Maybe what, Michael? Dad's voice cut through his stammering. Maybe you could fix my daughter? Maybe you could train her to be more acceptable to your family's standards? Mr. Foster, with all due respect, this is between Emma and my son, Patricia said, drawing herself up to her full height. Actually, Patricia, my mother's voice rang out clear and strong from her pew, since you made my husband and my family the subject of your little investigation, this very much involves all of us. I turned to see Mom standing now too, her face flushed with an anger I hadn't seen since Kate crashed her car senior year. Did you really think we wouldn't find out? Did you think Emma would just quietly accept your judgment of our family? Mom, please, I said, but she was just getting started. 28 years, Mom continued, her voice carrying to every corner of the sanctuary. 28 years I've been married to that man, and not once, has he ever disrespected my faith or prevented me from raising our children in the church. He has sat through countless masses, said grace at every family dinner, and supported every religious milestone our daughters have celebrated. But he doesn't believe, Patricia started. So what? Mom's voice rose to a level that would have made the angels weep. He shows up. He participates. He loves us enough to be part of something that isn't his own truth. Do you know what that's called, Patricia? It's called sacrifice. It's called love. It's called being a good husband and father. The congregation was dead silent now. Even the babies had stopped crying. And you, Mom turned her attention to Michael, who looked like he wanted to crawl under the altar. You sat in our home for 2 years. You ate our food, you laughed at Robert's jokes, you asked for his blessing to marry our daughter. All while harboring secret doubts about his character. Mrs. Foster, I never doubted, Michael began. Then why didn't you shut this down? Kate interjected, gesturing at Patricia. Why didn't you tell your mother that Emma's family was off limits? Why are you letting her sabotage your wedding day? Father Martinez cleared his throat nervously. Perhaps we should postpone the ceremony and discuss this privately. No. The word exploded out of me with such force that several people jumped. No, we're not postponing anything. We're going to finish this conversation right here, right now. I turned to face the congregation, these people who had watched me grow up, who had celebrated my first communion and confirmation, who had supported me through college and career changes, and now this. Everyone here deserves to know what kind of family they thought they were witnessing me marry into, I announced, my voice carrying clearly through the sanctuary. Apparently, the Pattersons have been conducting a months-long character assessment of my family, and we've been found wanting. Patricia's face went white. Emma, you're being dramatic. Am I, Patricia? Then please, enlighten us. What exactly makes you qualified to judge my father's heart? The question hung in the air like incense, heavy and choking. Patricia's mouth opened and closed, but for the first time since this nightmare began, she seemed to have run out of ammunition. That's what I thought, I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded when everything inside me was shaking. You have no answer because there isn't one. You don't know my father's heart. You don't know what he sacrificed for this family, what he's given up, what he's... Emma, stop. Michael's voice cut through mine, firm and commanding in a way I'd never heard before. Just stop. Please. I turned to stare at him, not believing what I was hearing. Excuse me? This isn't helping anyone, he said, his eyes darting nervously around the sanctuary. You're making a scene. Everyone's watching, and you're just making it worse. I'm making it worse? The words came out as a strangled laugh. Michael, your mother has spent months treating my family like some kind of spiritual contamination, and you think I'm the problem here? I think we should handle this privately, like adults, he said, and there was something in his tone, something condescending and patronizing, that made my vision go red around the edges. Like adults, I repeated slowly. Like how you and your mother handled your concerns about my family? That kind of adult behavior? Emma's right, Dad said quietly, stepping closer to me. If you had concerns, Michael, you should have come to us directly. Or better yet, to Emma. Instead, you let your mother conduct some kind of background investigation. It wasn't an investigation, Patricia snapped, apparently finding her voice again. It was simple observation. When you see someone reading atheist books in public, when you notice a family that only attends Sunday Mass but never participates in the broader church community. You were watching what I read? The ground felt like it was shifting under my feet. When? Where? Patricia's face flushed, but she pressed on. At the coffee shop near the university. You were reading something by that Dawkins person. On a Sunday morning, no less, instead of attending early Massachusetts. Oh my God, Kate breathed. You're actually stalking my sister. I was not stalking anyone, Patricia said indignantly. I happened to see her there on multiple occasions. Multiple occasions, I echoed, feeling sick. How many times did you just happen to see me there, Patricia? The silence that followed was answer enough. Jesus Christ, Dad muttered, then immediately looked apologetic toward the altar. Sorry, Father. Father Martinez waved weakly, looking like he wished he could disappear into his vestments. This is insane, I said, looking around at the congregation, at my family, at Michael's frozen face. Absolutely insane. Patricia, you've been following me? Monitoring my reading material? What's next, going through my browser history? Don't be ridiculous. Is it ridiculous? Because from where I'm standing, it seems like you've appointed yourself as some kind of spiritual police force for your son's girlfriend. Fiancé, Michael said quietly. Am I? I turned to face him fully. Am I still your fiancé, Michael? Because it sounds like you and your mother have some serious doubts about whether I'm worthy of that title. He looked at me for a long moment, his eyes darting between me and his mother, and I could see the war playing out across his face. The congregation held its collective breath. Of course you are, he said finally, but there was something hollow in his voice that made my heart sink. Emma, I love you. But we can't ignore these concerns forever. These concerns, I repeated, the words tasting like ashes. About my family. About my father. About our future, he said softly. About our children. And there it was. The real issue, finally laid bare. Our children, I repeated, the words hanging in the air like a death sentence. What about our children, Michael? He shifted uncomfortably, glancing at his mother for support. That one look told me everything I needed to know, but I wanted to hear him say it. Well, we've talked about raising them Catholic, obviously, he said, his voice getting smaller. But if your father is going to be a major influence in their lives. If my father is going to be their grandfather, you mean, I said, my voice dangerously quiet. If my father is going to love them and support them and be there for every birthday and Christmas and soccer game, just like he was for me. That's not what I meant. Then what did you mean, Michael? Spell it out for me. And for everyone else here, since we're apparently having this conversation in front of God and everybody. Patricia stepped forward, sensing her opportunity. What Michael is trying to say is that children need consistent moral guidance. They can't be exposed to conflicting worldviews without becoming confused about their faith. Conflicting worldviews, Dad repeated, his voice deadly calm. You mean like love, respect, and integrity? Those worldviews? You mock what you don't understand, Patricia shot back. Faith isn't just about being a good person. It's about accepting Christ as your savior, about believing in something greater than yourself. I believe in something greater than myself, Dad said, his eyes never leaving hers. I believe in my family. I believe in love that doesn't come with conditions or requirements. I believe in showing up for the people you care about, even when it's uncomfortable. That's not the same thing. Isn't it? Mom interjected, still standing in her pew like an avenging angel. Because from where I sit, Robert has shown more Christ-like behavior than anyone else in this sanctuary today. A murmur ran through the congregation. I could see heads nodding, whispers being exchanged. The tide was turning, and Patricia could feel it. This is exactly what I was afraid of, she said, her voice rising desperately. This is why these mixed marriages don't work. Look at what's happening right now. Look at the division, the conflict. The only conflict here, Aunt Helen's voice rang out from the third pew, is coming from you, Patricia. More murmurs, louder now. I could see Uncle Frank nodding vigorously, and even some of the Pattersons' family members looked uncomfortable. Michael, I said, turning back to face him. I need you to answer me honestly. Do you believe our children should have a relationship with my father? He looked trapped, his eyes darting between me and his mother again. Of course, but. But what? But only supervised visits? But only if he promises never to mention science or logic or critical thinking? But only if he pretends to believe something he doesn't? Emma, you're twisting my words. Then untwist them. Give me a straight answer. Do you want my father in our children's lives, yes or no? The silence stretched on for what felt like hours. Michael's face was pale, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool church air. His mother was staring at him intently, and I could practically see her willing him to choose her side. He started, then stopped. It's complicated, Emma. No, I said, my heart breaking with each word. No, it's really not complicated at all. Either you accept my family as they are, or you don't. Either you trust me to help raise children who can think for themselves, or you don't. Either you love me enough to stand up to your mother, or you don't. That's not fair. Fair? I laughed, and it came out harsh and bitter. What's not fair is finding out on my wedding day that my fiancé has been harboring secret doubts about my family for months. What's not fair is being ambushed at the altar by someone who thinks she has the right to judge my father's soul. The church felt like it was closing in around us, the weight of everyone's stare pressing down on my shoulders. But for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something like clarity cutting through the chaos. So what's it going to be, Michael? The silence that followed my question was deafening. Michael stood there, opening and closing his mouth like a fish out of water, while 300 pairs of eyes bore down on us. I could hear someone's baby crying in the back, the sound echoing off the vaulted ceiling like a soundtrack to this disaster. Emma, he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper, can we please just? No. I cut him off, surprising myself with a firmness in my voice. No more can we just anything. I'm done with deflection. I'm done with diplomatic non-answers. This is our wedding day, Michael. If you can't give me a straight answer now, when can you? Patricia stepped forward again, her face flushed with indignation. This is exactly what I mean about your family's influence, Emma. Look how confrontational you're being. In the house of God, no less. Confrontational? Dad's voice cracked like a whip. She's asking her fiancé to defend their relationship. That's not confrontational, that's basic human dignity. You've done quite enough, Robert, Patricia snapped. This is between Michael and Emma. Actually, a new voice interjected from the congregation. I think Robert's been the only one making any sense here. I turned to see who had spoken and nearly gasped. It was Mrs. Patterson, Michael's great-aunt on his father's side, a woman I'd met only twice but who had always struck me as formidable. She was rising from her seat in the fourth pew, her silver hair perfectly styled, her expression stern. Aunt Eleanor? Michael stammered. Sit down, Eleanor, Patricia hissed. This doesn't concern you. Doesn't concern me? Eleanor Patterson's eyebrows shot up. Young man, I've been a member of this parish for 67 years. I taught Sunday school when your father was in diapers. And in all my time here, I have never seen such unchristian behavior displayed so publicly. Finally, I heard someone mutter, and I was pretty sure it was Grandma Rose. Eleanor continued, her voice carrying easily through the sanctuary. Patricia, you should be ashamed of yourself. This poor girl's father just defended his daughter with more grace and biblical knowledge than you've shown in years of self-righteous posturing. How dare you, Patricia began, but Eleanor held up a perfectly manicured hand. I dare because someone needs to speak truth to this nonsense. Robert, I apologize for my family's behavior. You raised a lovely daughter, and any fool can see she loves Michael deeply. My throat tightened with unexpected emotion. This woman barely knew me, yet she was willing to stand up for my father when Michael couldn't find his voice. Thank you, Dad said quietly, his own voice thick. Don't thank me yet, Eleanor said, turning her sharp gaze on Michael. Because I want to hear what this boy has to say for himself. Michael James Patterson, your grandfather would be rolling in his grave if he could see how you're treating your bride. Michael's face went even paler at the mention of his grandfather. I remembered him telling me once that his grandfather had been his hero, a man who'd stood up to racial segregation in the South when it wasn't popular or safe to do so. Grandpa Jim was different, Michael said weakly. This situation is more complicated. Complicated how? Eleanor's voice could have cut glass. Because the man doesn't attend mass? Your grandfather married your grandmother in a courthouse because her family didn't approve of Catholics. Did that make his love less real? The congregation was completely silent now, hanging on every word. Even the baby had stopped crying. That's different, Patricia protested. They were both Christian, at least. Were they? Eleanor turned her steely gaze on her daughter-in-law. Because I remember Grandma Sarah questioning whether Catholics were really Christian at all. Funny how perspective changes when you're the one being judged, isn't it? Michael looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. I watched the blood drain from Michael's face as his gray tant's words hit home. The comparison to his beloved grandfather had clearly shaken him, but instead of finding his backbone, he seemed to shrink even smaller. That's not. Grandpa Jim never had to deal with raising children in today's world, he said, his voice getting smaller with each word. It's more complicated now with social media and different influences. Oh, for crying out loud, Eleanor snapped. Stop making excuses and answer the girl's question. Do you want her father in your children's lives or not? Before Michael could respond, Father Martinez finally stepped forward. I'd almost forgotten he was there, standing silently at the altar throughout this entire disaster. His face was grave as he surveyed the chaos that had erupted in his sanctuary. Perhaps, he said in his measured voice, we should take a brief recess to allow everyone to collect themselves. No, I said firmly, surprising myself again. No, Father. I appreciate what you're trying to do, but if we leave now, nothing gets resolved. We'll just spend 20 minutes in separate rooms, someone will convince us to work it out later, and we'll end up married with all these issues still hanging over our heads. Father Martinez nodded slowly. I understand your position, Emma. But this is unprecedented. Unprecedented, Patricia seized on the word like a lifeline. Exactly. This whole situation is unprecedented and inappropriate. Emma, if you had any respect for this sacred space, you'd table this discussion until... Until when? Mom's voice cut through Patricia's complaint. She was still standing in her pew, and now I could see she was trembling slightly, not with fear, but with barely contained fury. Until after they're married and it's too late for Emma to realize what kind of family she's marrying into? Catherine, please, Dad said gently, reaching toward her. But Mom shook her head. No, Robert. I've listened to you counsel patience and understanding for months while this woman has made passive-aggressive comments about our family. I've watched my daughter tie herself in knots trying to be acceptable to people who've already decided she's not good enough. I'm done being patient. The sight of my normally diplomatic mother finally losing her composure sent a chill down my spine. Mom was the peacekeeper in our family, the one who smoothed over conflicts and found middle ground. If she was done trying to keep the peace, things were worse than I'd thought. Mrs. Chen, Michael said desperately, I know my mother can be intense sometimes, but she just wants what's best. What's best for who? Mom shot back. Because it certainly isn't what's best for Emma. Do you know your daughter has been having anxiety attacks for the past 2 months? Do you know she's been questioning whether she's good enough for you because of the constant criticism? My face flamed with embarrassment. I hadn't told anyone about the anxiety, though apparently I hadn't hidden it as well as I thought. Emma? Dad's voice was soft but filled with concern. Sweetheart, why didn't you say anything? Because I thought I could handle it, I whispered. I thought if I just tried harder, if I proved myself enough. Oh, honey, Mom's anger melted into heartbreak. You shouldn't have to prove yourself to anyone. Not ever. Michael was staring at me with what looked like genuine shock. You never told me you were having anxiety attacks. When would I have told you? The words came out sharper than I intended. Every time I tried to talk about your mother's comments, you said I was overreacting. The silence that followed my words was deafening. Michael's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, and I could see the exact moment he realized how badly he'd failed me. But instead of the apology I desperately needed, he looked around at all the watching faces and seemed to crumble under the pressure. I didn't realize it was that serious, he stammered. You always seemed fine when we talked about it later. Because you made me feel like I was crazy for being upset in the first place. The words exploded out of me with months of pent-up frustration. Every single time, Michael. She didn't mean it that way. You're being too sensitive. Can't you just let it go? Well, I tried to let it go, and it nearly broke me. This is ridiculous, Patricia interjected, her voice shrill. If you can't handle a little constructive criticism. Constructive? Dad's voice was dangerously quiet. Is that what you call telling your future daughter-in-law that her family's godlessness will corrupt your grandchildren? Because I was there for that conversation at Easter dinner. Several people in the congregation gasped. I saw my cousin Maria cover her mouth in shock. She hadn't heard about the Easter incident. You said that? Eleanor Patterson's voice could have frozen water. Patricia Marie, please tell me you did not say that to this girl's face. Patricia's defiance faltered slightly. I was expressing legitimate concerns about. About what? Eleanor's voice rose. About a man who just demonstrated more biblical knowledge and Christian charity than half this congregation combined? About a family that raised a daughter who spent the last 6 months bending over backwards to accommodate your demands? It's not about accommodation, Michael said suddenly, finding his voice at the worst possible moment. It's about compatibility. About making sure we can build a strong foundation for our marriage. The words hit me like a physical blow. After everything, after watching my father defend me with more courage than Michael had ever shown, after learning that his great aunt had more faith in our relationship than he did, he was still talking about compatibility? Compatibility, I repeated slowly. So you're saying we're not compatible? I'm saying. Michael ran his hands through his hair, completely destroying his carefully styled wedding look. I'm saying maybe we should have talked about some of these things more before today. A collective intake of breath swept through the congregation. Even Father Martinez looked stunned. Before today? My voice came out deadly calm. We've been engaged for 18 months, Michael. We've done pre-marriage counseling. We've had countless conversations about family, faith, and our future. What exactly should we have talked about that we haven't already covered? The religious education of our children, for starters. Patricia jumped in, apparently emboldened by her son's words. You've been vague about your commitment to raising them in the faith. I haven't been vague, I said, my composure finally cracking completely. I've been accommodating. There's a difference. I agreed to Catholic school. I agreed to baptism. I agreed to regular mass attendance. I agreed to religious education classes. What more do you want? A signed affidavit that I'll never let them think for themselves? Emma, Dad warned softly, but I was beyond caring about diplomacy. No, I want to know, I continued, turning to face Michael fully. What exactly are you afraid of? That my father might teach our children to question things? That they might learn the value of intellectual honesty? That they might grow up understanding that faith and doubt can coexist? Michael's silence stretched on, and with each passing second, my heart broke a little more. Looking at Michael's silence, watching him struggle to meet my eyes, I felt something fundamental shift inside me. It wasn't just disappointment, it was clarity, sharp and painful and absolutely certain. You can't answer because you don't know, I said quietly. You don't actually know what you believe about any of this. You've just been going along with what your mother wants because it's easier than standing up to her. That's not true, Michael protested, but his voice lacked conviction. Isn't it? I stepped closer to him, lowering my voice so only he could hear. Tell me one time, just one, when you've disagreed with her about something important. Tell me one time you've chosen what you wanted over what she expected. His mouth opened, then closed. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. I thought so, I whispered. Emma, please, he said desperately. We can work this out. We just need to. To what? Compromise more? I've already compromised everything, Michael. My relationship with my parents, my own comfort in this community, my sense of self-worth. What's left for me to give up? Before he could answer, Patricia's shrill voice cut through our private moment. If you think you can manipulate my son with dramatics. Enough. The voice that thundered through the church wasn't Dad's this time, it was Eleanor Patterson's, and the authority in it was absolute. Patricia, you have disgraced yourself, your family, and this congregation today. Sit down and be silent, or remove yourself from this church. Patricia's face went white, then red. You can't speak to me like. I can and I will, Eleanor snapped. I've been a member of this parish for 73 years. I've buried 2 husbands and raised 5 children in this faith. I've seen marriages begin and end, and I know a doomed union when I see one. Her sharp gaze fixed on Michael. Not because of incompatibility, but because of cowardice. Michael flinched as if he'd been slapped. Mrs. Patterson, You nothing, she cut him off. That girl has shown more grace and maturity in the last half hour than you've shown in your entire engagement. Her father has demonstrated more Christian charity than your mother has shown in decades. And you stand there worried about compatibility? Father Martinez finally stepped forward again, his expression deeply troubled. Perhaps we should. Father, I interrupted gently, may I ask you something? He nodded cautiously. In all your years performing marriage ceremonies, have you ever seen a groom who needed to be convinced to defend his bride? Father Martinez's weathered face grew even more grave. He glanced at Michael, then back to me, and I saw the answer in his eyes before he spoke. Emma, he said carefully, the sacrament of marriage requires not just love, but commitment, sacrifice, and the willingness to put your spouse before all others save God. That's not an answer to my question, Father. No, he admitted quietly. I have never seen that. A sob caught in my throat, but I swallowed it down. I wouldn't fall apart here, not in front of everyone. Michael, I said, turning back to my fiancé, though the word felt foreign now. I need you to answer one question, and I need you to be completely honest. He nodded, though he looked terrified. If we get married today, will you put our marriage before your mother's approval? The question hung in the air like incense, heavy and inescapable. Michael's face cycled through a dozen emotions, fear, guilt, desperation, and something that might have been love. But no words came. And in that silence, I found my answer. The silence stretched on until it became its own kind of answer. I watched Michael's face, hoping desperately to see determination, conviction, anything that would tell me he was ready to fight for us. Instead, I saw a man drowning in expectations he'd never learned to question. He started, then stopped. His eyes darted to his mother, then back to me, then to the congregation watching our very public dissolution. It's not that simple, Emma. It is that simple, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. It's the simplest question in the world. You don't understand the position you're putting me in, Michael said, and I could hear the plea in his voice. She's my mother. Family is. I was supposed to be your family, I interrupted. Starting today. Starting right now. Patricia suddenly stood up, her face triumphant despite Eleanor Patterson's earlier rebuke. See? This is exactly what I was worried about. She's trying to turn you against your own mother, Michael. Making you choose. I'm not making him choose anything, I said, not taking my eyes off Michael. I'm asking him what choice he's already made. Emma's right, Dad said quietly. I'd almost forgotten he was still there, still standing like a guardian between my old life and whatever came next. Marriage isn't about managing competing loyalties. It's about creating a new primary loyalty. Don't lecture my son about marriage, Patricia snapped. You, with your godless philosophy. My godless philosophy, Dad said, his voice carrying just enough edge to cut through her bluster, taught me that when I married Emma's mother, she became my first priority. Not my parents, not my friends, not anyone else. Her. He looked directly at Michael. Your mother had 28 years to be the most important woman in your life. Today was supposed to be the day that changed. It's not about importance, Michael protested. It's about respect. About honoring your parents. The Bible says to leave your father and mother and cleave to your wife, Eleanor Patterson said sharply. It doesn't say unless it hurts their feelings. I felt a hysterical laugh building in my chest. Here was a 90-year-old Catholic matriarch and my atheist father, tag-teaming biblical wisdom while my fiancé stood there looking lost. Mrs. Patterson is right, Father Martinez said reluctantly. The scripture is quite clear on this matter. Michael's face was cycling through emotions so quickly I couldn't track them all. But what about compromise? What about finding middle ground? What middle ground? I asked. I've already moved so far towards your family's position that I can't even see where I started from. What exactly are you and your mother compromising on? Before Michael could answer, Patricia took a step forward. We've compromised by accepting this wedding at all. By welcoming someone from your background into our family. The congregation went dead silent. Even the children seemed to sense that something unforgivable had just been said. My background, I repeated slowly. Patricia, Father Martinez said, his voice heavy with warning. But Patricia was past listening to warnings. Yes, your background. Your father's influence, your family's lack of proper faith, your own wishy-washy commitment to the church. We've been very patient. Patient, Dad said, and there was something new in his voice now. Something that made me take a step back. You've been patient with my daughter's existence. That's not what I meant, Patricia said quickly, but we all knew it was exactly what she'd meant. Actually, Dad said, I think it's precisely what you meant. And I think it's time we addressed what this is really about. Dad stepped forward, and I realized this was it. This was the moment everything had been building toward. Not his earlier biblical takedown, but this. The final truth that needed to be spoken. This has never been about faith, Dad said, his voice carrying to every corner of the church. This has never been about tradition or propriety or anything else you've claimed. This is about control. This is about a woman who raised a son she could manipulate and panicked when she realized marriage might change that. How dare you, Patricia started. I'm not finished, Dad said with quiet authority. You see, Patricia, I've spent 2 years watching you chip away at my daughter's confidence. I've watched you question her worthiness, her commitment, her very right to exist in your family. And I've watched your son let you do it because standing up to you was harder than watching the woman he claimed to love diminish herself piece by piece. He turned to address the entire congregation now. I may not share your faith, but I know love when I see it. And I know what it isn't. Love doesn't require someone to erase themselves to be worthy of it. Michael finally found his voice. Mr. Rodriguez, that's not fair. I love Emma. Do you? Dad asked simply. Because love isn't a feeling, son. It's a choice. It's a choice you make every day, in every moment that matters. And when it mattered most, what did you choose? The silence was deafening. I looked at Michael, really looked at him, and saw not the man I thought I was marrying, but a boy who'd never learned to say no to his mother. Emma, Michael said desperately, we can fix this. We can go to counseling, we can work it out. No, I said quietly, and the word felt like a key turning in a lock. We can't. I slipped the engagement ring off my finger. It felt heavier than it should have, weighted with 2 years of compromise and self-doubt. I held it out to Michael, and when he didn't take it, I gently placed it on the altar rail. I'm sorry, I said, and I meant it. I'm sorry for both of us. Father Martinez stepped forward carefully. Emma, perhaps if we... Father, thank you for everything you've done for us. But this wedding isn't going to happen today. Maybe it never should have. I turned to face the congregation, my family, my friends, people who'd watched me grow up in this church. I'm sorry for the disruption. Please, enjoy the reception dinner. Don't let this ruin your Sunday. Eleanor Patterson stood up slowly, leaning heavily on her cane. Emma Rodriguez, she called out, her voice carrying despite her age. You walk out of here with your head high. You've conducted yourself with more dignity than anyone had a right to expect. A few people started clapping, quietly at first, then louder. Not everyone, but enough. Enough to matter. Dad appeared at my side, offering me his arm. Ready to go home, sweetheart? Yeah, I said, taking his arm. I'm ready. As we walked down the aisle, not the triumphant march I'd imagined, but something better, something true, I heard Patricia's voice one last time. Michael, say something. Don't let her just leave. But Michael said nothing at all. And for the first time in 2 years, his silence felt like exactly the answer I needed. The church doors opened ahead of us, letting in afternoon sunlight and the promise of whatever came next.